Hello, Matthew.
Yeah, I think you've lost the plot. For the past 2 weeks, you've gone on about Meghan and Harry. At which point in that article that Jeremy Clarkson wrote was there mention of race?
He didn't mention race.
Yeah, but you did in your opening gambit.
No, I know I did.
At the top of your show, you were mentioning race.
Do you know why?
So at what point in that article was there mention of her colour or her race?
When you read it, what did you think? Just before I promise.
Right. I thought it was quite right. I think these two spin doctors, as I would call them, not a Duke and Duchess, the Duke and Duchess of spin, all they've done, they want privacy and that, yet they do this and they go on about this, that and the other, do Netflix and that. They want privacy, shut their mouths and stay in America. But you were opening up with...
I happen to think that what Jeremy Clarkson has written will put the race element to one side. You and I aren't going to agree on that. I think he was describing a lynching. So we'll leave it that. You're entitled to disagree with me. So we'll disagree on that one. But what you cannot disagree with, surely, Matthew, I'm asking you, was that an acceptable level of violent... Was that violent language acceptable to say how much she irritates? Oh, well, there you go. We can agree.
Absolutely not. It wasn't violent. And if he wanted to write that, he can write that.
You don't think it was violent? Okay. Well, then I'm done with you, Matthew. Because if you don't think a man describing a naked woman being dragged through the streets in every town of Britain while the crowds chant shame and throw lumps of excrement at her, this after he says he lies awake, grinding his teeth and dreaming of such an event. If you don't think that is violent language, then God help the women of Canterbury.
The airwaves of LBC turned into an unexpected battlefield of morality, dignity, and truth. Shelagh Fogarty, a broadcaster known for her calm but firm approach, found herself face-to-face with the kind of caller that has become all too common in Britain's fevered debates about Meghan Sussex, a man who believed Jeremy Clarkson's hateful tirade was, well, just words, who wanted to excuse, minimize, and honestly polish the filth that Clarkson had dumped into a national newspaper. It wasn't just the defense of Clarkson that was chilling, but the casualness with which this caller dismissed the sheer violence in his language. When Shelagh listened to his reasoning, she did what so many others have been afraid to do. She stopped him cold with the simple, devastating truth. If you don't think Clarkson used violent language, then God help women around you. And with those words, Shelagh not only defended Meghan, but she defended every woman who has ever been on the receiving end of misogynistic bile masquerading as banter. Clarkson's column in The Sun wasn't an ordinary rant. It wasn't the cheeky irreverence he once tried to package as his public persona. No, this was something darker, something soaked in the fantasy of violence. He wrote of Meghan with a venom so raw that it startled even those who had grown used to the endless tabloid campaign against her. He spoke of hating her on a cellular level and conjured up grotesque imagery of parading her naked through the streets while people threw excrement at her. That's not criticism, that's not journalism, that's not satire. That's a violent medieval humiliation fantasy, and it came from the pen of a man who thought he was untouchable because the tabloids have for too long normalized cruelty toward Meghan Sussex. And yet, here was this caller on Shelagh's show, trying to tell us that this was somehow not racist, not misogynistic, not violent, when in truth, it was all of those things at once. And that's why Shelagh's words mattered so much. Because too often, women's pain is dismissed as overreaction. Too often, Meghan's suffering is explained away as she asked for it, or she deserves it, or it's just Clarkson being Clarkson. But Shelagh reminded her audience, and this caller in particular, that words are not harmless. Words shape culture. Words shape how women are treated in workplaces, in relationships, in public life. And when those words come from a man like Clarkson, whose career was built on platform after platform, amplified by television, newspapers, and now Amazon, they carry weight. To say you fantasize about humiliating a woman with violence is not an innocent slip of the tongue. It is a reflection of a culture that already treats women, especially women of color, as targets for degradation. And if you, as a man, cannot see that, then truly, as Shelagh said, God help the women in your orbit. The caller's defense of Clarkson was more than just tone-deaf. It was unhinged. He seemed desperate to carve out a space where Clarkson's violent imagination could be excused as just a joke, as if centuries of misogynistic jokes haven't already been weaponized to strip women of safety, dignity, and humanity. It was the kind of gaslighting Meghan Sussex has endured since the moment she entered the royal family. We saw it in the headlines comparing her to Kate Middleton, where the very same actions, eating avocado, cradling a baby bump, closing a car door, were praised when Kate did them, but demonized when Meghan did. We saw it in the palace's silence when Meghan confessed she had suicidal thoughts, a silence that spoke volumes about whose lives are valued and whose suffering is considered an inconvenience. And we saw it in the way the media, gleefully amplified Clarkson's column, pretending it was an outlier when in reality it was simply the most grotesque expression of the same undercurrent of hate Meghan has faced for years. What makes Shelagh Fogarty's intervention so powerful is that she didn't allow the caller to wriggle free. She didn't nod politely and move on, as so many broadcasters do in the name of balance. Instead, she named the violence. She pointed out what so many refuse to admit, that when men normalize violent fantasies against women, they contribute to a climate where real violence thrives. Her words were a protective shield, not just for Meghan Sussex, but for every woman listening who has ever felt unsafe, unheard, or dismissed. She showed what it means to use a platform responsibly, to stand in truth even when it's uncomfortable, to defend the humanity of those who are targeted, and to refuse to let misogyny masquerade as free speech. If you really think about it, Clarkson's rant was the logical endpoint of years of media poison. Meghan had already been called difficult, divisive, manipulative, too ambitious, too American, too black. Every time she spoke about her struggles, she was met with sneers from the likes of Piers Morgan, who practically made a career out of belittling her pain. The tabloids printed lies about her constantly, often with palace sources whispering in the background, feeding the fire. And so, when Clarkson put his violent fantasy in print, it was not a shock to those who had been paying attention. It was the culmination of years of dog whistling, of racism disguised as tradition, of misogyny dressed up as journalism. The only difference was that Clarkson said the quiet part out loud, and instead of condemning him outright, people like that caller scrambled to protect him, to defend the indefensible, to cling to a culture that treats Meghan as less than human. What does it say about Britain that it took Clarkson's column for some people to finally say enough? Women's rights groups spoke out, politicians demanded accountability, his own daughter denounced his words, and yet there were still those who tried to say, "Oh, it was just a joke," or "he apologized, so move on." But can you imagine if Meghan's name were replaced with Kate's? Can you imagine the uproar if Clarkson had fantasized about humiliating the future queen in that way? The double standard is so glaring it could light up the whole of Fleet Street. And this is why Shelagh's rebuke of that caller was so necessary. Because, in a media landscape where Meghan is constantly dehumanized, there really must be voices willing to call out the violence, to say out loud what too many know in their hearts, that this hatred is dangerous and it just cannot be brushed aside. Shelagh Fogarty deserves thanks not just for that one line, but honestly for the broader principle she embodies. She has consistently refused to join the mob against Meghan. She has consistently treated callers with sharp but fair honesty, challenging the racism and misogyny that so often hides beneath polite excuses. In a world where broadcasters chase ratings by stoking hate, Shelagh has chosen to stand for truth. And for Meghan Sussex, a woman who has been dragged through the mud for daring to marry the man she loves, for daring to be black, for daring to be outspoken, that kind of defense is, just invaluable. It is proof that not everyone in Britain has been hypnotized by the tabloid script. It is proof that voices of reason still exist, even in the loud chaos of talk radio. This moment between Shelagh and the caller is bigger than a radio spat. It is a reflection of the crossroads Britain finds itself at. Will it continue to allow women, especially women of color, to be demeaned, dehumanized, and threatened under the guise of tradition and free speech? Or will it finally confront the toxic culture that has allowed men like Clarkson to spew hatred without consequence for decades? Meghan Sussex is not just a scapegoat in this story. She is a mirror held up to Britain's conscience. And Shelagh Fogarty, with her sharp rebuke, reminded us that choosing to excuse violence is itself a form of violence. So thank you, Shelagh, for cutting through the lies. Thank you for refusing to let violent language be normalized. Thank you for standing up for Meghan when so many others sat on their hands. In that moment, you reminded us all that defending truth isn't about politeness or balance. It's about courage. And in a media landscape where Meghan Sussex has been treated as fair game for every insult, every smear, every violent fantasy, courage is exactly what we need.